Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have a little bit of a different video for you. The reason for that being that the video that I originally wanted to upload today is not ready yet, and so I thought that since at the beginning of the week I saw the movie adaptation of the book Dune by Frank Herbert, I think the author is called. Already forgot that again. I thought I'd share with you my thoughts on the movie and upload a little bit of a movie review, which I don't do often. Also, gotta be honest, I wanted to flex a little bit that I already was able to see the movie, because it does not happen often that Europeans get to see a movie before USians, before Americans do, so it's just a nice experience. But before we get into the review, two things that I want to have out of the way first. First of all, I have not read the book, so I'm not going to talk about the movie in terms of it being an adaptation, because I cannot. I have not read the book. However, I am now slightly interested in reading the book, so if you're interested in me doing like a second review of the movie, but as an adaptation, once I have read the book, please leave your comments down below. Now, the second thing that I wanted to talk about is that I know shit about movies. Like, when I read books, yes, sometimes I just want to read a book because I want to enjoy a book and a good story. But with books, I do have a certain appreciation also for the technical aspects of storytelling, of writing, and so on. And I can recognize some of the elements or some of the technical elements that might be used to tell a story. I do not have the knowledge when it comes to movies. I don't watch movies a lot. I mostly rewatch, to be honest. I hardly ever watch a new film. And so this review is purely gonna be me not knowing anything about movies, telling you what I saw and trying to bring across why I think I saw what I saw. So yeah, that's just as a little disclaimer. But now, first things first, a little summary. Basically, you have three actors within the movie. First, you have the Fremen who live on this planet called Arrakis, I believe. I already forgot like most of the names, gotta be honest. And Arrakis is a desert planet that has one very important resource, and that is spice. Spice can help you, on the one hand, prolong your life, but it's also needed for space travel. And then you have the Empire, who wants to obviously source that spice. And within the Empire, you once again have two actors. You have one family who was charged with sourcing spice for the longest time, but now the Emperor has called them back and has instead told this other family, who our main character Paul belongs to now move to Arrakis and to start sourcing spice. And then there's also some chosen one narratives woven in there. So, basic gist of the story, pretty much. Now, let's start with talking about the visuals of the movie. So, this movie was one of the most visually pleasing movie viewing experiences that I have ever had. As I said, I don't know a lot about movies. Because of that, I also don't know a lot about cutting, editing, filming, shooting, lighting movies. So I cannot tell you what exactly was so great about the visuals. However, what I can tell you, that to me it felt like every single shot, every single frame of this movie was taken with such care, and that pretty much every single frame of the movie could be just seen as a work of art on its own. And that just, it was so incredibly beautiful. I love the visual storytelling within this movie, and to be honest, I usually don't watch movies for their visuals. Usually I watch a movie for the plot, and then I go out of the movie remembering the plot mostly, but I don't really remember single shots or anything along those lines. However, when I came out of Dune, the first thing I remembered, and like the thing that made the biggest impression on me, was the visuals. And so yeah, it just doesn't happen to me very often. Also, as I said, I thought the visual storytelling was really well done. I think especially within fantasy and within sci-fi also, although I don't watch sci-fi movies as much, the visual storytelling can sometimes be a little bit confusing. Also when you change settings and when you move settings and so on. However, within this movie, to me it felt like every single setting had a very distinct feel and a very distinct color palette to it, which made it really easy for me to know where we are right now and where we're moving right now. And I very much enjoyed that. I also very much enjoyed how distinct all of the different actors were from each other, like actors as in actors within the story, not the human actors. I hope it makes sense what I'm saying. But yeah, like the actors within the story, I felt like they all had very distinct designs to them. So I also very much enjoyed that. However, I do have to say that especially the people on Arrakis, although I do think that's from the book, like taken from the book, from what I've heard of it, because I've heard that especially when it comes to like cultural appropriation, there are some criticisms that a lot of especially BIPOC readers have towards the book. But yeah, especially the people on Arrakis, they were very distinctly reminiscent of Middle Eastern cultures, very obviously. And again, it's not really a criticism towards the movie. I do believe that comes from the book. So yeah, just it made some other aspects of the story feel a little bit heightened and more extreme than they would otherwise. Then you had the house that our main character belonged to. I think it's called Atreides, if I remember correctly. But yeah, most of their visuals, especially before they come to Arrakis, is very militaristic. So yeah, that's that. It was just very, I don't even know if I would say it was distinctly European, but you know, it was mostly very militaristic. And then you had our bad guys who were in their design just very stereotypically bad guys. However, there I do have a criticism as well, because our main bad guy just, his design rubbed me the wrong way. Like, he was depicted as very obese and overly fat, but depicted in a way that made it very disgusting. And I don't know, I'm not well versed enough in, you know, narratives around fat phobia and so on, so I cannot say if I was just for some reason rubbed the wrong way by that, or if the way he was depicted really was fat phobic. But you know, just if that's something that you're sensitive towards, just be aware of that going into the movie. And lastly, something that I want to say about the visual storytelling is also that there was a lot of it. Like, I feel there were a lot of scenes where visuals were much more used than dialogue or narration to bring across a point, to bring across feelings and tension and so on. And that was just so well done. Like, this was a movie that didn't need its dialogue or its narration to hold up the storytelling, but that very much used its medium, which is visuals, to tell the story. And that's just, when a movie manages that, that's how you know it's a good movie. Like, not in terms of it being a good story or whatever, but it being a good movie. It can still have a bad story, but also be a good movie. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I hope it makes sense. But now moving on to the second thing that absolutely blew me away, and that was the score. I am also not someone who notices scores a lot. I have some scores that I really love, like the Pirates of the Caribbean one, who incidentally, you know, it's the same person who made it. Hans Zimmer was the componist, creator. I don't know how you say it in English, but you know, he was the dude who made both scores. I also really love the Lord of the Rings score, but usually, like, I will remember some iconic scores, but while watching a movie, I will not notice scores a lot. I did notice the score in this movie, and this movie I think lived just as much from its sound design and the storytelling within the sound design and how that supported the visual storytelling as it did live off the visual storytelling itself. And that's just, once again, it's something that's very incredible to me, and that I even noticed that is just something outstanding to me. I mean, something that I have to say that I think people who have issues with sensory overload need to maybe be careful of is that, especially compared to dialogue, the movie was very loud. And for me, I mean, I'm not someone who has extreme sensory issues, but I've had a few movies before where my viewing experience was diminished by having a sensory overload. The one that I remember the most is Into the Spider-Verse, which I actually did not enjoy as much as a lot of other people enjoyed it because the music was too loud for me and there were too many colors and flashing lights and so on, and I just, you know, I couldn't deal with it during the movie. I mean, I still enjoyed it, but came out of the movie very exhausted. And that was the case a little bit with the sound in this movie as well, or with the music in this movie as well, where for me personally, who does not deal the best with loud noises and loud music, it was on the border a lot of times. It walked the line where I could still very much enjoy the movie and where my viewing experience wasn't diminished. And that's just why I wanted to mention that people who have more extreme sensory issues and sensory overload issues might want to take care or be aware of that before going into the movie. So yeah, just again, I don't think it's a reason why you shouldn't go see the movie, because I don't think it was bad to that extent, but I think it's something that you should be aware before going into the movie. And especially because at some points I thought the dialogue was almost too low for me and I almost didn't understand what they were saying, which, yeah, just think it was more the contrast between the two than the music on its own that led to me being a bit overwhelmed sometimes with the volume of the music. Now, in terms of storytelling, I thought that the movie managed to really hit the spot where it had a little bit of narration, but that narration then wasn't just used to just exposition dump, which of course is necessary in some degrees, but that narration was used, like, it was in story mostly, it was diegetic and not non-diegetic narration, so it wasn't like you saw images and someone talked over these images. That just happened once actually at the very beginning. But mostly you had diegetic narration and diegetic exposition dumps, but the way they were done, I actually really didn't mind them because I thought they mostly brought across very well the information that you couldn't really get across through dialogue or through, you know, other ways. And also the way the narration was done is that it mostly was direct setup for something that happened later in the movie. I wanted to say book just now. So I thought that was really well done. But aside from that, as I said, a lot of what happens within the movie is gotten across visually rather than through dialogue. So I really, really enjoyed that. And in that way, I think also the acting was absolutely stellar of all the actors. There was only one actor where I thought that just felt a little bit off to me right now and a little bit like bad acting, and that was Dave Bautista, who is the actor who's also in Guardians of the Galaxy, if you don't know who he is. But he was barely in the movie, so, you know, I could deal with that okay. But aside from that, all the acting was really, really well done. I mean, the random shots of Zendaya did get a bit much towards the end, not gonna lie. But yeah, so I thought that all of the acting was really, really well done. Just very good. and very much acting without dialogue once again. And just, you know, bringing across messages and bringing across tension just with the face and the body language. And so, yeah, once again, I am impressed. And also what I forgot to say in terms of the narration parts, it is a science fiction film, and so there is a lot of world building. However, I grasped very quickly what was going on, who is important, how are they related to each other, and so on. But then I've also heard from acquaintances that they didn't know what was going on during the entire first half of the movie. So I don't know how much of that is due to the movie just being really good at relaying information understandably, or how much of that is me being able to grasp that information very quickly and very well, because I'm just familiar with fantasy science fiction world building. So yeah, I don't know, but I just thought that's a nice info to have if you, like me, intend to watch the movie without reading the book. Now the next part I want to talk about in terms of storytelling is the pacing / how the story is built, how the story arc goes, and that is very odd. It does not have, at least in my opinion, a traditional 3-act or 5-act structure. So you don't have like a slow beginning with world building and then you have like spikes in action and whatever, and it just slowly goes up, and then you have a climax, and then it just kind of decreases in tension again until you have the ending. What happens is you have a very slow beginning where there's a lot of setup in terms of characters, where there's a lot of setup in terms of story, where there is tension from the very beginning, because kind of from the very beginning there's this almost uncomfortable feeling where you know there's something wrong. And there are moments that are more tense and moments that are more relaxed. However, I would say like the first half-ish of the movie, maybe even a little bit more or a little bit less, I don't know, I cannot tell time. It felt very long to me because, you know, not a lot was happening per se. But the first half-ish of the movie, you don't really get any action, which I actually really liked. Because I think a lot of Hollywood movies, especially blockbusters, rely too much on action nowadays. And I am not the biggest action fan. Like, I want the story to be told to me and not just through action scenes. So you had this very long, very calm but tense part within the movie. And then at the end you had the second half was the half where most of the action happened. And where it felt like it actually didn't feel like the story was progressing that much. It felt like about the same amount of story actually happened in the first half as happened in the second half, but where the story was definitely more fast-paced because you got more action scenes, because we got more setting changes and so on. And like, I loved the first half of the movie. I didn't like the second half that much, because it felt like the climax of the movie was quite early in, around the halfway point, and then the second half of the movie just constantly decreased in tension, and especially like the final action scene that often like marks the end of the movie and then usually is the climax of the movie, didn't feel like the climax of the movie, and also felt like it completely lacked tension, and I didn't feel like there was any danger to our main characters whatsoever anymore. So yeah, loved the first half of the movie pacing wise, didn't like the second half as much, didn't like how that was done, because while it was faster paced, it just felt like, you know, we started decreasing tension too early within the film for me personally to enjoy it. However, I can really appreciate still that choices were made that do not fit the usual Hollywood blockbuster standard. And so I don't think that it's a bad movie because of that. It's just, you know, an odd viewing experience, or it made it an odd viewing experience for me. You know, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but just because something isn't everyone's cup of tea, or just because something isn't my cup of tea, doesn't mean it's bad. And again, the first half of the movie and the way the storytelling worked within the first half of the movie, both visually as well as script-wise, just completely makes up for it for me. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is, you know, the actual story, maybe. And in terms of that, I don't know how much I can say because, you know, as I said, I haven't read the book. I don't know how many of the things that are within the story actually are taken from the book, how many of the things that bother me maybe even are improved from how they are in the book. But something that I can say about the story is that I wasn't too interested in the main character. I actually can see myself way more enjoying the movie than the book, because I gotta be honest, the story itself didn't really do it that much for me. I thought it was a little generic so far, and I mean, of course it's hard to say it was generic when it was one of the first big science fiction space operas, although I have to say, for me at least, as far as the movie goes, this is fantasy in space. Like, the themes and everything just belong for me with fantasy a lot more than with science fiction. I mean, of course, the lines between fantasy and science fiction are very blurred and there are a lot of crossovers. But you know, if there were themes that I would put more within one genre than within the other genre, I would mostly put them more within fantasy than within science fiction. But yeah, in terms of the story, I'm not that interested. I also gotta be honest, I'm not that interested in reading the books because I thought the story in the movie was so great and I now want to know how it continues on. But the main reason I want to read the books now is because my biggest issue with the story, and why I'm not sure I even like the story, is that it is basically a white savior story. Because you have this planet of the oppressed, and you have a white boy who is the chosen one. I want to know how the book deals with it, and I don't want to wait, or I want to know how the story deals with it in future in future adaptations in general, like of just the movie, because apparently this movie was just like the first part of the first book. Like, it wasn't even that big of a chunk of the first book, but just a third or something. So I want to know how this story continues on, if it's addressed or not. I don't want to wait for the second movie to come out. And also apparently within the books, it's not really addressed within the first book, but it is addressed within later books. So that's the main reason for me for wanting to read the books. But in terms of the movie, I would say the story isn't the reason why you should watch the movie. I don't think the story is that great, to be honest. I think most of the hype probably comes from it being a classic more than it being able to completely stand on its own. So yeah, in terms of story, I don't want to talk about too much because, again, I gotta be honest, I mostly have criticisms. There were some characters that I really enjoyed, but definitely not most of the characters. And so yeah, overall, I would say go watch the movie for the viewing experience. Go watch it in cinemas, because this is definitely one of those movies that, you know, it's not worth it saying I'll just wait until it's out on streaming services or whatever, because it'll be the same anyway. No, this is a movie you gotta see in cinemas. But yeah, don't have that much to say about the story, because, as I said, can't really compare it adaptation wise, and most of the story to me either was forgettable or not that great. So yeah, that was it for my little review of Dune. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have seen the movie, tell me in the comments down below what your thoughts were. If you have read the books, tell me in the comments down below if you're interested in seeing the movie or not. And yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, tell me in the comments down below if you're interested in watching the movie. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. All the links to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will also be left linked down below, so go and check those out as well. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!